fundamental paradigm shift that I would like to discuss with you is the one in which the territory changes its position, its role in our discourses, in our images of the future, in our expectations about the change of cities and territory. And the question of the subjectification of the territory is fundamental. How the territory becomes a subject. How we pass from a territory that has been always considered as an object, as a support, as just simply a place to exploit, to a territory that becomes a subject, so that has rights, that has peculiarities, that brings together certain characteristics that we respect. So this passage is not easy to consider, and the way we will go through these passages by understanding these two dimensions. The first dimension concerns the way in which we produce knowledge about this subject, this new subject, how architects and designers, landscape architects, urbanists, you have engineer architects, many of you are engineer architects. How do we produce knowledge about this new subject that normally was not? And the second dimension, the ontological dimension, which means how through this shift and the transition we discuss in deep the foundation of our job, of our research. In particular, what I would like to put at the center is that we are reflecting at the same time on space, of course, but also on life. This is again, is not something so evident. In the past, the designers, they were reflecting on space fundamentally. Life was present, but more as a kind of accessory or something that was getting there at a certain moment, but not as a starting point of the reflection. Different life conditions. That's why I was this morning insisting on the fact that we need to use this space, the space of the MIS, also as a space of experimentation. And Lisa was also insisting on this point, because if we want to test this change, this transition, which is also a transition in terms of value system, we need to organize these encounter spaces. They will not be immediately simply spaces you can realize, you can discuss, let's say, as realistic alternatives. Sometimes they will be simply different, really alternative, and counter spaces, counter with respect to the practice of projects of design that is still continuing on a direction that is different from the one we would like to open. I think that it is very important that we consider the MIS will be the place where we can test these new counter spaces, just simply to have the possibility to analyze, to understand, and practice the set of paradigm shifts that are required by the design for ecological and social transition. This complexity will remain, as we said, and it will be part of our work. I'm not going to insist on this point. So, how we will propose to you in this semester to touch those questions. So there will be a series of lectures that will be inside the studio that I will propose to you. And of course, I consider that these lectures are strong opportunities for you, but also for us to have a discussion about those questions. So first of all, let's start from an approach we want to discuss with you and a research program that is connected to this approach. Urbanism. This morning we were saying that urbanism is inside, let's say, strong thinking. And I would propose to start from two authors. They are two Italian authors, but it could be also others. But let's say they are very clear in their positioning. The first way to intend urbanism is the one that Leonardo Benevolo developed in a small book, but that was influential book. That was, in fact, for this reason, translated also in English, The Origins of Modern Town Planning. So the book was written in '63 and was translated almost 10 years after. And if you don't know this book, I suggest that we will read it together, maybe comment together. Leonardo Benevolo was a historian. He's better known for the history of architecture that he developed. That also was translated in many different languages. But he was also an urbanist, and an urbanist that was looking for a new relation with politics, and that was presented. In fact, this book was written after having presented the main lines of the book to the Christian Democrat Party in Italy, that was the party that was ruling Italy after the Second World War, as a kind of program of action for a political party that had the power to rule Italy, a country that was coming out of the Second World War, destroyed, and that had lots to do. So in that moment, this is the definition he brings of what is urbanism, and in particular, what is modern urbanism. And there's something very interesting that we start by saying modern urbanism was invented, was born to repair. So not to extend, not to transform radically, to repair. So he uses this word. That's very strange. Why in that moment he is speaking of repair? Repairing is a verb we use today. No? The urbanist as repairing the disasters that the previous realized, etc. So imagine in the 60s, at the beginning of the 60s, he used the term repair. He was convinced that the industrial city was already there. So the Industrial Revolution came in several moments during the 19th century, the beginning of the 20th century, in the different countries in Europe. And this was a disaster because this industrial city was not planned. It was the result of the climate of urgency, of bigger developments. So you remember some of the surveys that were realized in the 19th century, at the beginning of the 20th century, about the conditions of living in industrial cities, London or others. So urbanism was arriving after that, not before, not during, but after. After that, the modern city had already been fundamentally realized, creating new problems, creating a new urban question that was related to the low quality of housing, the lack of green spaces, all of the things that we know were then very important for modern urbanism. So modern urbanism arrives after the damages. That's why urbanism, in his opinion, had to repair the disasters created by this incredible development related to the industrial civilization. By arriving after, by repairing the origins, and Benevolo really speaks of origins, which is very difficult to say what are the origins. You can investigate the roots, etc., but say the origin is this one. So the origins are technical. So of course, urbanism has a system of techniques related to the construction and repairing of the industrial city, and moralistic, no? Because there were problems related to, he's not using the term ethics, but moralistic in the sense that it was clear that there were populations that were living in conditions that were not acceptable, that kids had not the proper spaces where to grow up. So there was really a moral problem. And urbanism, so this urbanism arriving after the disaster. And for Benevolo, this was typical of any urbanistic project, arriving too late, when the disaster was already done. And this was, for many a long time has really influenced the thinking about what is urbanism. No? Something arriving after, never being there at the moment when it is necessary. So I mean, quite embarrassing that definition of urbanism. Although, as it is making more precise, it is necessary to realize any operational program. So politics needs urbanists in order to realize their own political program. And the action, again here a very strong point, is in function of the modification of spatial relations. So urbanism deals with spatial relations, but spatial relations that are modified by the modification of social and economic relations. So first, society changes, economic relations change, then space can be adapted. So again, we are after. And also you see there is an idea of dependence. First, politics decides, then urbanists start to make their work. Of course, I would like to develop a discussion with you. So the idea is that we will have discourses, and then 1 or 2 days after, we will discuss about what you think. Of course, we can discuss also during, but we say, let's also take some moment, maybe also reading some text in order to have a deeper discussion. So urbanism just arrives after the damages, and it follows the transformation in society and the economic development. And has this goal, this general balance, this idea of equilibrium that in general would support any political action. We are plenty into the reformistic idea. So urbanism is a tool of reformism, and it's targeting, let's say, this kind of equilibrium among the different social parties. So what he clearly put on the table is the need of a new relation between urbanism and politics. He is offering his contribution in this context of speaking to the politicians related to the Christian Democrats, and offering, say, the services of urbanism to the politicians, and in order to establish a new relation between urbanism and politics, but a relation of dependence. So first, politics, society changes, and then urbanism elaborates the project. A second way of defining urbanism, here I take Bernardo Secchi as a figure of reference. His book, in the first lecture in urbanism, is not translated in English, but it is translated in French and in Spanish, in Portuguese. So eventually, if you can manage with those languages, you can also read Italian. And here we see, of course, we are in 2000, so it's not the 60s. It's a totally different role of urbanism that we can read through this text. Here, urbanism is defined in a much broader way. It is related to the, in general, to the transformation of the territory. So urbanism deals with this. All transformation is not just the typical traditional urban transformation, but all the transformation. And it's not only interested to the transformation, so the change that we can see, but it is interested to understand the process that has led to that transformation. So you investigate also the process. You need to understand who are the actors that are leading or that transform. And you have to question also the intentions that were moving the actors, not just the actor in itself, but which were the intention of this transformation, the techniques they will use, the outputs that are expected, the new problems that are generated by that transformation, inducing new transformation. So as you understand, here you open a very wide field of exploration from our side. So when we discuss about the transformations, and in general, it's it's a definition of urbanism that is very inclusive, very curious, very open, where urbanism is not just a series of projects, of works, theories, regulations, in which we have to understand what is the language that will eventually federate and unify all these forces, but the traces of a vast body of practices, because transformation is made by practices. Someone is doing, is making the transformation. And in general, we define this body of practices as those of the confused and conscious modification of the state of the territory and of the city. So these modifications, these transformations are not clear, are not completely transparent, they are confused, they are full of ambiguities. Sometimes they are conscious, sometimes they are just the result of occasional let's say, encounters, and that is urbanism. I think that's very important that we reflect a moment on this. On one side, you have urbanism as kind of army of the politician, and on the other side, you have urbanism as simply open to the reality of transformation, simply looking at and try to figure out, but in a very rigorous way, because you investigate and not just the transformation, but also why it is there, what were the expectations, what are the techniques, what are the new problems. So you understand that it makes, in my opinion, urbanism extremely fascinating, but also you need a certain rigor to go through all this immense amount of information of actors. So what is fundamental of this position, and that was the idea of Bernardo Secchi, is that this complexity of the gaze, the way in which we look at the city and the population, but also in general, the contemporary society asks for a new project. So in relation to this complexity, a kind of simplified vision of the level where politicians give you the line and then you follow it doesn't work anymore. The project is something that is the result of your interpretation, of your understanding of this complexity, of the possibility to discuss it with the others, other actors, people, citizens, communities, territories. You also open a dialogue with the territory itself. And this complexity is the reason why we need a new type of approach. Now, I propose to you a third position that is closer to the second one for reasons that are obvious. I have worked for many years with Bernardo Secchi, and we have also founded an office together. We have worked for almost 30 years together, so of course it's closer to that. 10, 20 years ago, even longer, I would have completely dismantled and not accepted the position of Leonardo de Negro. Today, I think that we have to go back to that position because nevertheless, we measure today the distance or the difficulty not to connect with the political responsibility, the political body. And we understand that we have to refuse, in my opinion, the position of being serving a line that is proposed by someone else, but at the same time, we need to find again a relation with them. And it is not easy, especially in this moment. So my position is that in this condition of complexity and of uncertainty also, urbanism and urban and territorial design in particular should be considered as a critical tool. A critical tool that you use to understand situation, to connect with different types of actors, subjects in general, places, a form of thinking and of investigation. And in that sense, it is a researcher that can produce a certain type of original knowledge. So the first part of this cycle of lectures will be dedicated to the role of design as a knowledge producer. So here we are really into the first part of my initial slide. So this is really the epistemological role of design. How design produces knowledge. There has been a lot of debate in the last years on research by design, as you know. I never found in this literature what I was looking for, and that's why I wrote it. It's normal that you write a book when you don't find the book you are looking for. Then you needed to try to make your different experiences, your different reflection, and say, okay, let's try to put it this way and see if it is convincing. Why I added this need, something happened, was because I was really not satisfied of the marginalization of our position. I think that in the societal debate we are inside, we are in today, architects, urban design, territorial design, etc., remain nevertheless quite marginal. And this marginality, I think, is problematic, not only for us, but also for society, that can miss, in fact, a contribution that could come from us. Doesn't work now. So my hypothesis is very simple, is that if we can demonstrate, as today, because this book was first published in 2010, and it was the result of at least 10 years of reflection, so it started to happen some years. But in that moment, it was not evident. Today, there is a stronger evidence that research by design is producing something original, a new knowledge. And we will work on this hypothesis, or the same now, more than just an hypothesis. I was very surprised by listening the Baumeister of Brussels. So Brussels has this figure of Baumeister, so someone that is responsible of the quality of all the operations, and especially the bigger scales of operation in Brussels. So this kind of minister of the quality of space in Brussels. At a certain moment, he said in a seminar that research by design is a specific job. So it's not just something you do academically. It's not just it's something that society is interested to work with. Research by design. So when things are at that point, they enter the normal procedure, the normal protocols of investigating the city. I think we can start to say that we are back, let's say, around the table, and we are in the position of bringing our thought inside this societal discussion. But at the moment in which I wrote the book, it was not the same situation as today. And even today, there is a lot that remains to be done. So this production of knowledge, how it is done, how it is made. I reflected on these three epistemologies. So here you understand I come back to this idea of epistemology of design. So three main operations, three main fields of knowledge production, which can help in reinforcing, strengthening the role of design, even the social role of design, with the originality that is related to design production. And the three epistemologies, of which we will discuss in several lectures, concern the capacity of design to produce concepts, to describe situation, to construct a situated knowledge, and to explore future time. So that's why a series of lectures will be dedicated to this. So territories of conceptualization, we will reflect on a series of figures, really rhetorical figures or conceptual figures that we have developed in the past, porosity, isotropy, horizontality, and also other figures. Because what we are interested in is how exactly we work with concepts, figures, images, and metaphors. Also in the design studio, we will reflect on a kind of a new concepts that could be used to interpret the non-built unbuilt spaces of Great Geneva. So there will be this need also to really produce the new images using the second field, the second epistemological field, is the territorial of description, where we go back to this idea of elementarism. So this deconstruction of space. Here you see an image of an incredible work of reading a city that we realized many years ago, where really by walking in the city a lot, you take notes. This map was created before, the tools we use today, AutoCAD, whatever. No, internet did not exist. I mean, it was made simply going by feet on site and taking notes and speaking with people and indicate what the ladies that were living there is saying to you about that space, or entering the gardens, entering the industrial activities. Here you see that it's a mixed use sitting in. All the brown are industrial activities, or were industrial activities, because in the following years, a big crisis arrived in this type of city. So we can story in another moment. But what is important is that here you really construct an understanding in the very minimal elements of space, that make space, and you connect the practices, you connect the uses that are in that space. So you, at the same time, you understand this double dimensions. Through this approach, you can really use design to construct a situated knowledge, which I think is a fundamental part of the knowledge we produce with our work. It's not a general, absolute knowledge, but it's a rather situated knowledge, but it is extremely, extremely important. The last field of investigation of design is the one looking towards the future, so the projective field, where you use scenarios to construct images of the future. And these images of the future will push you to make them as precise as possible. So not to step back from the need to imagine in detail what the future might be. These are some hyper-realistic models that we realized reflecting on the vision for Brussels 2040. And I want to insist a lot on this necessity of imagining in detail the future. The future should not be imagined with large, let's say, vague images only, but on the contrary, you have to oblige yourself to make this effort of imagination, not because this will be realized in 2040, we are not so ingenious, but because in this way, everyone can understand what eventually 2040 could look like and can take a position, take a stance, a choice, etc. So it's a kind of a way to construct a correct discussion and open discussion about the future. Maybe this is again. It's only a PowerPoint presentation. We are not labeling these things. Okay. So this would be the first part, more dedicated to the epistemology of design. But the second part, I would like also to go through the ontological dimension. So this investigation of the foundations. So why we are doing certain things and on the basis of which value system and ethical position. And here we will enter into this confrontation, hard confrontation with on one side, the presence of life, more and more in our debate, in our discussion, in our work, in our project, but on the other, with the relation between life, space, and power. So the difficulty of connecting this field. First of all, design and space. We are spatial designers. You know, we can design many things. We like to design space. space, which I think cannot only be a support. Of course, space is also a support that can help to realize what you like, what you are expecting from your path, from your parcours. Space is a capital, and I think that we have to reflect a lot on space as a collective capital. So in which way space can contribute to a collective enhancement of the quality of life. But space is also an agent. It can make things that are not always what we would like, what we expect from this space. But space can be a space extremely hard and extremely close to your activities, to your images, to your proposals. No, space can be really something that is making inertia, no? Becoming very rigid. Or on the other side, it can be a space that can be modeled, can be easily introduced or integrated in your imagination. So all these aspects of space, they are present in our work on design. But let's arrive to life. So design, space, and life. And we will reflect on the presence of life in all our discussions. And I can really assure you that it was not the case in the past. Life was not so present in the debate about cities and architecture. And if I think to the 80s, and I think to the 70s where it was present, but to the 80s, to the 90s, and I think almost 2000, I think that life was not really evident. But since then, more and more, we are speaking and thinking about the demographic and ecological transition. So we have problems related to the quality of life in the different parts of the planet. We are back again to the question of secure population, so the question of risks and securing life, let's say. When we speak of urban metabolism, we are speaking of flows of life also. We speak of metamorphosis of the urban space. Metamorphosis is something that is, metamorphosis has something to do about living objects or living organisms somewhere. We are interested in the biotic relations, not only abiotic relations, but also biotic relations in cities. All this has to do with life, space, and of course, relations of power. And this is exactly what biopolitical space wants to address, with all the problems related to this, violence, rejection, inclusion, exclusion, etc. As you probably know, the reflection on biopolitics has to do with Michel Foucault, so we will come back to this important reference. But I would like also to bring something more recent, that is a sentence from the last article written by Conceptualization before he died, and it's also the moment to say that today is the 7th anniversary of this event. And Conceptualization, in this last article, that was written for a seminar in Brasilia about the tradition of urbanism, the traditions of urbanism. And Conceptualization wrote the metaphysical, methodological committee of modern Western urbanism is towards conceiving the project of the city and the territory as being part of the vaster biopolitical action. I think that today we have we cannot just remain on this point that is fundamental, but we cannot stop to the thinking of the modern project. We are in front of the construction taking shape of a new biopolitical project. My personal opinion is that the transition, so the socio-ecological transition, is a new biopolitical project. It will rediscuss and reframe the relation between life, space, and power. So I think we have to consider in this hypothesis, I use the idea of the new biopolitical project as a sort of theory building device. So it can be helpful to understand which theories can be helpful in the future to construct this new way to design and to work on cities. It's also the good one, because we are really tackling major transformation, and someone is talking of great, coming back to some other authors, to a great transformation. And it's a good moment to think in terms of biopolitics and to understand which were the fundamental, the crucial aspect of biopolitics in the past. As you know, there were the question of discipline on one side, but also the question of safety, of secure populations. So discipline on a population and secure a population. We are not completely distant, because the question of securing population, as I told before, is still there. But of course, I don't think we can remain only to the traditional aspect of biopolitics that were underlined by Michel Foucault. Maybe there are new aspects concerning life, design, and power relations that we should tackle with design. Since the modern movement, the city has changed dramatically. This is just one picture of the northern part of Europe, but we can take whatever part of the world, and it will be nevertheless similar, although different. Here you see different types of conurbations, different types of continuities, different also metropolitan conditions. That's something that is interesting, that we have, let's say, understood also with the work related to the research on the horizontal metropolis, where it is interesting, and this is a book that is not yet published, but which we will discuss. It is an anthology of texts in which we try to make visible this trajectory of reinterpretation of the city from say, the traditional interpretation of the small nucleus that is consolidated, normally defined not by walls or perimeters. And today is something totally different. It is, as Militza was saying this morning, is between territorial and city, there is no possibility not to establish a structure. That's why in the 60s, already in Italy, Manfredo Tafuri was proposing this idea of city territorial. So where in fact there is no distinction anymore. This is also interesting because we understand that we are discussing these topics since 50, 60 years, even more if we take some of the first reflection on this aspect. And there is really a lot to be learned when we put together all different attempts to define the new urban condition, which is the one in which we live today. So, say, we also go through cities and territories trying to understand their characteristics. But coming back to the biopolitical space, which is a biopolitical space in this type of new environment, there will be a series of lectures dedicated to this. And an introduction about space inside the new biopolitical project. And then 3 lectures in which we will deal 3 ways in which space has been part of this biopolitical project. The first, let's say, is related to the space function. I'm happy that also Elena is going to work on function. Function is back again. Again, it's a term very, very characterized by very used in the modern era. And now this new functionalism is in a way coming back with new characteristics. And when we speak of ecology, we are always speaking of functions. When we speak of soil, we are always speaking of functionalities. So that's interesting, no? Because at a certain moment we have criticized the functionalistic approach, but in fact it is back again and in a different way. So space function, space that is imagined through the functions that are inside the space and that design the space. This is just a picture of a René Bram collage of a linear city that was imagined between Antwerp and Liège in the 30s, where you see, an expression of what this functional space had to be. It had to be transparent, it had to be for everyone, it had to be for kids living elderly people. This extension of the public, that was a fundamental character of the modern project. Then we will go through space nature. Here, we will go back to some attempt to do in the modern architecture and modern urbanism to work with nature. There are some attempts. Today, we are reframing them, of course. And we are working, and we work a lot on this relation between our space and the space of nature, where in fact, we are working on the hypothesis of coexistence of living together, of these two spaces. And that's for me a new biopolitical thing. And then finally, the space support. That has been also a fundamental moment of realizing this biopolitical aspect of space. For example, in Constant and in Babylon, the idea of the support that could give the freedom to everybody to construct their own specific space, and where the planned space had only to play this role, the role of support, of living conditions, and no more than that, and then leaving the rest to your own initiative. It's also a fundamental moment that we are reflecting again today about the appropriation or extending the co-construction of space to the different aspects. So these are the lectures. The lectures are a kind of background or backbone, we will see, and then the studio itself. So for the studio, I have only 10 minutes maybe. It's not fundamental that we have no discussion in this moment. We will have in the next days. Okay? Just to maintain and remember some of the curiosity of criticism. So the studio has been started out of buildable areas. In French, it's nicer, I have to say. Also, because it seems more with more tension. Out of buildable areas. So we want to look at the territory of Geneva, starting from what is not built. Very, very clear. And we propose this as a project for the city territory. So what we propose is that starting from this out of buildable areas, we can reframe also the general project for the so the themes, I think, now are clear because we have already discussed the centrality of the ecological and socioeconomic transition. We will reflect on the role of open spaces, which are in general, say, quite weak. Now, the open space is weaker than the building space in general. Not always, because in Switzerland, we have to consider that this pastoral environment has also generated very rigid, spaces that sometimes are forests or not built, are very protected, etc. So they are not always weak, but they have been weak for a long time. And also the question of the horizontality of territorial and spatial regulation. Horizontality means non-hierarchical, let's say, to make it very simple. The context is the Great Geneva, which is part of this alpine metropolis. And we have three hypotheses that we will discuss one by one. This is the context is very much designed by fundamental geographical figures, because the lake, the mountains. That's why also I insist on the fact that it's not only a lake metropolis, but it's also a mountain metropolis. Which is part, you see the Lemon Lake on the left. which is part and the conclusion of the Swiss plateau, that is the denser and also most dynamic part of Switzerland. The Great Geneva is a growing metropolis. Even in the last statistics that are not here represented, but even in the last ones, the Great Geneva areas remains a very attractive area. Why, for example, Lausanne, you see Lausanne there, can you see where is Lausanne? For example, today has revised the hypothesis of growth that were made in the past. Say that thank you. In the Great Geneva area and the Zurich area are the most developing areas in Switzerland. So there is a question of growing. A growing metropolis, which of course introduces element of tension, pressure on this open space. But here you see from the higher point, the lake, and also different parts, a lot of countryside, let's say, or agriculture, some forest entering and rivers. There is something very interesting in this territory, as in many other territories, is that there is not only a city or some few cities, but there is really this mesh of villages that is homogeneously covering all the territory. And in terms of population, that's very important if you look at the histogram there, is that today we have practically half the population living inside cities and peripheries, urban peripheries, and half of the population living in villages. Villages that in the past could be also losing population, but today they start to grow again, and villages that have been always growing with no interruptions. And here, so from in this image, the big city has been completely erased, and it's a very interesting way to reveal, in fact, this isotropic network of villages. In general, the plans, the ideas about this metropolis always are focusing on the center of Geneva in particular, or on the lines that are and will be well served by public transport. So the tramway lines that are partially existing, partially in realization. So the figure of the metropolitan scale is this center and fingers coming out along the line of public transport. But this is a very exclusive figure of a metropolis, because in fact the previous image shows something very, very different. Now, if we reverse the approach, instead of starting from the big city, instead of starting from the line of the public transport, if we look at the rest, what can happen? So what if, so that's the first hypothesis, we reverse the approach and we start from the unbuildable area. The second hypothesis, what if we look at the unbuildable area through the lens of the ecosystem services, and we consider this as a way to work on the transition. So we consider the ecosystem service as agents of the transition. This work will be realized together also with Elena Cogato-Lanza and the Canton of Geneva, and together also the services in the Canton of Geneva that are taking care of the Great Geneva area that is larger than the Canton. Is also partially French, so between France and Switzerland. And they are interested to work with us. So your experience will be an experience of dealing with those actors, those stakeholders, and to have a moment of discussion with them, and also in collaboration with the University of Geneva for all the expertise related to the different types of ecosystem services. What we propose to you, and this experimental in the sense that it's the first time we do in this way, is really to take literally the 4 families of ecosystem services. So what if we really reflect on provision, on regulating, on supporting, and on cultural services? It's also interesting that when you take ecosystem services, there are different ways to represent them. Also a very interesting point to be investigated. No? You see here, they are around a donut, so it's circular, and all are on the same level. But if I take, for example, this, we have a kind of centrality that is the supporting, in fact, the supporting services that are the nutrient cycling, the water cycling, the soil formation, and photosynthesis. They are kind of supporting all the others. So the regulating, the cultural, the provision. In fact, they need the supporting work. So you understand also from this point that when we think that ecosystem services are the way in which ecosystems serve us, is a totally incomprehensible definition. In fact, ecosystems services support ecosystems. We are part, we are inside, but they are not working for us. They are working for the ecosystem in general. In fact, to have regulating services, air quality, climate, water runoff, erosion, etc., you need that, for example, the soil formation is working well. Otherwise, the rest will not serve anything. And so let's say this is just a part of the question we will consider, but also let's reflect on the cultural aspect. Here we speak of ethical values, existence values. Again, we are going back to the question of really life. And then, of course, there is recreation and ecotourism. But normally, we always think about recreation and ecotourism. What about thinking about existence value? No? We change, really the tone of our conversation. And also, I would like to remember that the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment was launched publicly 20 years ago. So these are really themes that have been constructed in the last 30, 35 years, and that are becoming effective references only since 20 years. So we are really in something new. And also some of the confusion, some of the ambiguities we will cross by looking at this are related to the fact that there is not so much experimentation, and also the connection between urbanism and this world. Yeah, rhetorically it's easy to say, but in the really fundamental aspect is not so evident. Okay, fantastic. Really like fighting against the projection. But we are really, I think, close to the end, also because in 5 minutes we should. So by looking at these unbuildable areas and having this lens of the ecosystem services will oblige us to represent things differently. It's clear that we cannot draw as we were doing in the past. So, for example, a simple section can become a very complex description of relations, above ground, underground, ecological dynamics. We will discuss this hypothesis of the weak structure, so these unbuildable spaces, and not only them, but I would say principally those spaces as being able to give a structure, maybe a different type of structure, not a rigid, strong structure, maybe something different, to a large territory like the one of Geneva. And also trying to imagine spaces that are related to that. By working on the weak structure, we will have to reflect inevitably also on the strong structure. That is also, say, it will be highlighted in a different way, establishing relations with the weak structure. We will explore two watersheds. So we used as unity watershed, because we think that speaking of ecosystem services, it would have been good to start from this. So we have two watersheds, the Alondon watershed and the Air watershed in the Great Geneva, and we will try to explore them. They are very interesting, both. The one in the Pays de Gex is in the French, mainly in the French part of the Great Geneva. So there are a lot of questions related to the role that the French part of the Great Geneva has developed as a kind of serving Geneva especially from the point of view of housing, the housing that Geneva cannot host because the territory of Geneva is very limited. So Geneva is too attractive for the people it can accept. So the French part has become a sort of dormitory for the people working in Geneva. The Air watershed is also very interesting. It's between the Swiss side and the French side, so side of the border. And it's interested by a lot of new projects, a new tramway line, a beautiful project by Georges Deconstruction about the Air river, the renaturalization, or say, the reconstruction of the Air river that we will visit for sure when we go there. And new projects, new housing projects that will arrive also in the future. So it's a very strategic part of the region. And we will develop different types of descriptive tools. The mapping will be important because we would like to continue an activity we started in the frame of the Great Geneva consultation about the future of Great Geneva. I have to say that Milica was also guiding a team, so I was guiding one team from the EPFL and Milica one from the ETH. And we started this idea of atlas of the transition. In fact, if we want to renew our gaze, we will have to draw, to represent, to map different things and in a different way. So the atlas of the transition, which is in this case a trans-border atlas of the transition, so as the problem also of putting together two countries, two nations, and this is not very, very simple. We would like to continue this activity of atlas construction, but also we will insist on using video, photography, etc. And we will have some moment of also discussion about that. We will work on conceptualization because, as I said, starting from the four families of ecosystem services and these unbuildable areas, we will have to reconceive what is that. Is not just agriculture, it's much more than only agriculture, it's not only kind of peripheral relics, is maybe something different. And I think we have to inspire ourselves, and we will ask you also to work on that, on how we can represent things, because it is only when we represent things that we can think about them. So the representation is absolutely crucial. And we will develop scenarios and prototypes. Prototypes are important because we will be in dialogue with concrete actors. So to develop maybe actions, and prototypes will be interesting also to imagine possible realization in the future. So a project for the city territory that starts from this out of buildable areas. Okay, I have concluded. I was a bit long, I'm sorry. We have, I think, 10 minutes if you want for questions or for comments. That would be very good. Then at a certain, because you have to be there at 5.
Yeah.
So in fact, you only need 10 minutes to go there, but to be sure, at latest 4:45, we have to leave this. Thank you very much, and let's start the conversation. If you like. Let us embarrass. We can take more time, but please, you have understood that our scope is to construct a specific space. I think that Vesna was saying a few words this morning about this. So we are really interested to have a very simple and informal way of working together. So this we are there. If there are,
sorry,
it's
just a question. I would be really interested in your lecture number 4, I think, is about the few conditions and scenarios.
You can
offer to try online.
Yes, the idea is that we can make available, also because maybe a couple of students will arrive later. So we need to have this hybrid,
Maybe the contact
machine. Yeah, of course. It's too much, maybe. To dance, I understand, but that's why I said before that we can open the discussion when you like, not necessarily immediately after the presentation. Of course, the presentations will be available for you to and then each lecture, of course, contains suggestions, readings. So at the end, you will have a small library, physical or not, but in any case, books that maybe you will not immediately use or read during the semester, but useful for the future. I
have a question about the expected outcomes of this year. Do you expect to see physical projective issue scenarios, or should we also take a path of more speculative ideas when we talk about the future?
I think that we can expect both of them. Although I have to say that we prefer to tell you that you have really try to cross all the different dimensions of design and scales also. But for sure, we will have a period in which we will investigate also the idea of reflecting this for families. Not that I think that I don't know, but we are so used not to this 4 words: provisioning, but then if we enter, you discover this incredible complexity. We will need, of course, and that's why you will have also courses in ecology. We will have lectures on ecosystem services in Great Geneva from experts that are based in Geneva. I think we have to learn, and we have to bring this. Is the typical case of concepts that have to pass from one field to another field, and in this movement, concepts change. They are rethought. So for sure, this conceptual or speculative part will be important. We will try to push you also, nevertheless, to give a kind of material, not to be afraid of the materiality, because the materiality is very important. Our space is normally, if we don't speculate too much, is what we touch, what we see, what we are in. So we should maintain this strong connection between urbanism and the materiality of space. And also the fieldwork will help in understanding the materiality. I don't know if we already asked Valentin, but everybody is comfortable with the bike?
The majority say yes.
That's very important because I know how many kilometers we have to do that. A lot.
I don't want to say it, but
You don't want to say?
You will be informed.
I can say it.
Quite a lot. But if you feel more comfortable to open the discussion, we have the opportunity to do so on a beautiful apéro outside at 5. So we can
slowly
and still discuss until this place. It's a Rolex Center, Learning Center EPFL. I suppose you see it in the west entrance, so in the lake side. And
we can follow you.
Yeah, for sure.
Maybe we can say that in 5 minutes, those that want to follow Valentin will be downstairs. Those that are already known.
So thank you so much. Now we are going to the apero at the Relax Center, and I will close in the Zoom meeting. Okay.